Hello, and thanks for joining in. Today with me I have Joel. How are you, Joel? Okay?
Hello, Joe.
Majority. Let's start again. 1, 3. Uh, Hello, thanks for joining in. Today with me I have Joel. How are you, Joel? Okay?
Good, thanks, Robert. How are you?
Good, thanks. Today it's a recorded session because we have something else. However, usually we stream these live. So a quick reminder, we do this on a weekly basis, every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European Time or at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can ask us any questions during any live session. So if you are watching this recorded session and you have any questions, please send us your questions via email at questions@melapress.com and we will answer them during our next live session. Thank you for joining in. Today we'll be talking mostly about logs. We have a plugin, WP Activity Log, so we have quite a bit of experience. Both me and Joel have been involved in the product. We've done support. We've been at WordCamps. We spoke to people. So yeah, we've been exposed to this subject for quite a few years. From where shall we start, Joel? Logs. What comes to mind when we start talking about logs?
So I think first maybe we can explain the infrastructure. So we need to keep in mind that WordPress is a web application. So you have the server. On top of the server has an operating system, and then there's the web server, and then there's WordPress the application. And every element is basically capable of generating logs. So when talking about logs, primarily what a log is it keeps a record of what happened and when.
Very good point. You started with that because as a rule of thumb, almost every device on the network, even your own computer, your own mobile, network switches, routers, everything. Typically, they have, of course, they're running an operating system and some other type of software, and typically most software and most operating systems keep a log of what's happening. Typically in a typical setup, as Joel was explaining, you have WordPress, which is the web application, and PHP, and then you have web server. The most commons are Apache and Nginx, right, Joel? Those are the most common.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
You get some IIS, Microsoft.
Yeah, the
but,
Microsoft.
Yes,
We
not
do actually. It's funny because in support we do sometimes get questions from people who are still running Internet Information Services (IIS) from Microsoft.
yeah.
But it's by far Nginx and Apache are the most popular and are the ones which support PHP better. And then you have operating systems. Yeah, there's a wide variety. Of course, Apache and Nginx run on Linux and Unix, so you can have Ubuntu, Red Hat. There are a lot of flavors.
There's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, there's also the MySQL server or MariaDB, which is the database server where the WordPress database is hosted. That's also another service or daemon, as called in Linux. All of these different components usually have logs. So yeah, what type of logs are we looking at, Joe? I think first of all, I think it's important to make a distinction because there are, like, WordPress by default, WordPress itself as an application doesn't have any logging per se, but everything else has logging. So on your website you already have a lot of logs without knowing. So it's good to first of all to make a distinction. So first of all, I think before we go into the user actions and user tracking, maybe we can just give a brief overview about the other types of logs, because there are also logs used for development, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, you have the PHP, which is what WordPress uses to function. That has its own logs. The web server, of course, has its own logs. Excuse me. MySQL and WordPress, whilst it doesn't have its own log, it does have a debug log, which is a development log.
Yeah, it's good to point. Like the WordPress logs which you mentioned, they're a bit different. So these type of logs usually are used for development, like the PHP error log. If there's some bug, syntax error in the code or something is crashing, then you're going to look at it. The same with the web server error logs. the MySQL server you mentioned also, like, there's the error log and the slow log. Slow log is quite interesting. Not many people know about it usually. The slow log is basically you can enable it to keep a log of the slow queries of which are slow queries, so you can kind of basically troubleshoot. And the WordPress logs you mentioned are actually the debug logs. They are disabled by default. They are developer logs. They're nothing. They're not for the average. They're nothing. Cannot be used to track things or what's happening. They're basically,
Exactly.
yeah, as the name implies, they are debug logs. So basically, they're used for development purposes. They're disabled by default. We have an article on our website on how to enable them. You basically add a line in the WP config to enable them. There are a few settings which you can enable, disable, like how much logs do you want and where do you want to write them. But yeah, in the debug log, you
Exactly.
will find typically it's used by developers. We use it a lot, by the way, in our support. So if someone encounters a problem with one of our plugins, it depends what type of problem, but sometimes we ask them to enable the debug log, reproduce the issue, and then send us debug log. Because basically in the debug log, from the developer's point of view, you're going to find much more information about like what's running, what's crashing, and where, which line of code, etc.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and of course there are other log files in the operating system as well. So yeah, there are already a lot of logs. It depends, of course. Some logs, if you have a dedicated server, then of course you have access to all these logs. If you have managed hosting, typically you'd have the PHP error logs, the web server logs. I'm not sure about the MySQL server, but most probably if you ask, of course, if you are experiencing some problems, if you speak to your web host, most probably they can share these logs with you.
Provided. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so those are the logs, yeah, like for development purposes. So kind of like they're outside the scope of today's talk. Today we're going to talk about activity logs, like logs that you can use to track what's happening on your website, both on the web application level, as in the web server, how it's running and who's accessing things, but also on WordPress itself, like as in how can you keep a log of what's happening inside WordPress, because it's very important to make a bit of a distinction. um, what you can see in your web server log files is you're seeing who is accessing WordPress from which IP, which HTTP requests they are sending and stuff. So you can see, like, of course, if user is logging in, but you cannot see actually specific things like if someone changed the content or something like that, because that's very different. So yeah, we're going to see the differences there, and yeah, and we'll see actually what you can do with them. First of all, by the way, there are a few different logs, right, Joel? There's the web server access logs. What else?
Yeah, exactly. There's a web server, access log. There are, if you have a firewall or CDN, they do have their own logging system. Um, uh, the
System logs, I think,
system
because
log.
usually,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
for example, auth.log, like the operating system, you can see who it. Again, this is we're talking system log if you have a dedicated server, because in the managed hosting you won't see that.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
and on top of that we have the WordPress activity log. You mentioned, by the way, you mentioned the firewall and CDN logs. Is a very important point. So if you have a firewall, which is not a plugin, which is like a firewall, like which sits like a CDN basically, which sits between the website visitor and your website, you might find a lot of information there, because basically those logs are logs of requests before actually reaching your website. So you might find, you might find some interesting information there. And then of course we have the WordPress activity logs. WordPress by default doesn't keep a log of what's happening on your website. Now we have a plugin, it's called WP Activity Log, which you can install it, and basically it keeps a log of user actions and changes, like user, when did they log in, what changes are doing, if someone installed a plugin, updated a plugin, changed some WordPress settings, changed a page, changed the content, created a user, all these stuff. All this type of information, like what is happening inside of WordPress itself. You won't find it in the web server access logs, but you can only find it with by installing a plugin like WP Activity Log.
Yeah.
Um, of it's a very common question. Like, my website is not popular, Joel. Like, why would I want to bother with logs? Like, what are the benefits? WordPress or not? I'm talking in general, like logs. Let's like, what are the benefits of having logs in general?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are many reasons why why you should maintain a log, even if your website is not popular and you're the only person. accessing the administration area of your WordPress, like you have the only user account. So first of all, it's to improve the troubleshooting processes. So even if your site is not popular and you're the only person accessing it, rather logging in, things can still break. And when they do, typically what happened right before things broke down is not as has at least contributed to the breakdown. So you'll want to know exactly what has happened.
For
Um, uh,
example, yeah, you you noticed. By the way, this happens on it happens on our live site as well. For example, you notice that I don't know, like something is missing. Usually had a new section, the pricing page, and now is no longer there. And I'm presuming, yeah, by going to the logs, for example, you can see if someone updated the page or if someone installed the plugin maybe or someone changed something in the team, right? Like this type of
uh, uh,
troubleshooting.
exactly, exactly. And even if you're the only person who's logging in, maybe there were automatic updates, something updated, and it broke down something else, and now suddenly the website is not working as it should. So
Mhm.
even if you're the only person, like let alone if you have a team accessing the website and everyone is updating pages and products and whatever it is.
I think once you're
Mhm.
mentioning this, by the way, it's a good important because many people as well look at logs as if like, oh, policing Big Brother or stuff like that. I mean, we use logs in our team, of course, and we have different permissions. Everyone, it's important to point out that this is not about policing. It's about like, yeah, troubleshooting, and logs are very important. It's not about because I want to know what Joel or who what did what. It's basically it's as we're saying, like if something happens on the website, it's not about pointing finger. Oh, let's find out what happened so we can solve this problem as soon as possible. That's all it is, right?
Exactly, 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 exactly. And there was something else I wanted to say.
Sorry.
There was something else I wanted to say,
Mm,
but it will come back
sorry.
to me.
No worries. So we're talking about troubleshooting. So that's extremely important. In fact, by the way, since we're talking about troubleshooting, I think a very common scenario for logs agencies, like we see a lot, and a lot of agencies, they have these issues with clients, like, oh, the website broke down, who did what, no one ever did any changes. By the way, we see it ourselves as well. Sometimes we receive support email like, oh, like this, I don't know, your plugin stopped keeping all of this one. But I never changed anything. Like, are you sure you never changed anything? You know, it's like usually like things, unless you, as you said, unless there's an update, there's something. If you leave them running on their own, 99% of the cases they're going to keep on working as they are. You know, so
Exactly.
so when it comes to agencies, I think in fact we have a large number of customers as agencies, even the free plugin. Yeah, agencies, it's really ideal. It's about basically there's always like agencies like how much can the website owner do? If you're giving them admin access, especially, they can do everything, and that means also they can break the website, not on purpose, but everyone makes mistakes. So a common scenario is agencies and clients like having some sort of logging is really important, very important.
Exactly, exactly. And it avoids awkward conversations where the client denies they have done something specific, but you know that it was them because it could have been no one else, and suddenly it becomes your word against theirs. Whereas when you
Exactly.
have a log, then you have a record like this is undisputable, this is what happened and when and from which IP, and you have a record of everything that has happened.
Exactly. Yeah, agencies,
And
by
that
the
will,
way,
yeah,
I've seen agencies where they use logs, quite frankly, for to just not to justify, but to show their customers what they've been doing. For example, I don't know, the last month we've updated these posts, we've updated these plugins, we've changed this theme, you know. So yeah, it's quite
exactly, exactly. And since with WP Activity Log, you can issue reports and it has white labeling, so you can have your agency information and the logo and colors and all of that, then it makes it that much easier because you're sharing a professional report,
exactly, yeah.
not a
And
text file, just yeah.
yeah. And it's not just troubleshooting, by the way. I think I would say another benefit, which is kind of like ties in with troubleshooting, user accountability. Again, it's not about policing, but uh, we have a lot of users who use our plugin for example, e-commerce solutions. It's the same. Like you have an e-commerce, you're a team. You don't have to be a big team, as Joe said. Like even if you're like 2 3 people, and for some reason I don't know, some order that wasn't supposed to be processed has been processed, or some item all of a sudden is out of stock, or things like that. You can actually, by having logs, you can see, okay, let's see who changed the stock amount, for example, or who
Yeah, yeah.
changed, who processed this order, or who approved this order, or stuff like that, right? We see a lot, no, like especially when it comes to e-commerce, with a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
codes.
definitely. And again, as you were saying, it's not about policing users, but if the process needs to be changed to basically make sure that fewer mistakes are made, then the log is going to have to do that because it will identify where things are breaking down. Like you see that this should not have happened. So we need to update the operational sort of process to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Very, very good point. Actually, you're mentioning this is very good. So it's not just about, yeah, accountability, like even improving processes. I think lately I've heard about this process called after action report. It's used usually by the US Army, which, like, after there's an operation, they analyze like what went good, what went wrong, and like to improve. So it's very common, like, yeah, like every time we do some things on the website, for example, there is this happening, or we have to call someone, etc. So it's good maybe to use the logs and start improving to the pro. Okay, what have we done? What was the process? How did we? Who did what at what stage and how and in which order? And then you can use the logs to improve. Very good point.
Yeah, yeah. I believe in Agile, they have something similar called postmortem.
Okay, okay, interesting. Okay, so it's something
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay, so we spoke about, yeah, troubleshooting, of course, ideal scenarios, agencies, accountability, e-commerce. By the way, not just e-commerce. We're talking about, there are a lot of big websites out there, uh, news websites, membership websites, especially memberships. You know, like we have where you have a lot of membership. Who changed the role of a member, or the access, or the privileges? Also, we deal a lot with very common, especially logs, especially with what we call the big businesses websites, yeah, medical hospitals, universities. We've seen,
Financial. Yeah.
yeah, like especially universities where you have um, a lot of environments where students have their own portals, for example, they access results or stuff, or maybe they have their own test portals. You have teachers, you have parents accessing other information. So logs extremely are really, really important in these type of scenarios. Um, so you have accountability, and I think it's also very important. Yeah, logs also used for security slash incident triage. I mean, they can be used, right, Joe, like before an, as in like to detect, possibly detect something, during to see what's happening, and after to, yeah, to analyze. As in, like, those, there are quite a lot we can do, like, in terms of security when it comes to logs, right?
Exactly, exactly. And the cool thing about activity log is that as a security measure, it is both proactive and reactive. So proactive, so you can set up notifications. So if there are, for example, I don't know, five failed logins in a row, inform me. So you can take action uh, before it escalates. And reactive, if there's been an incident, you can refer to the logs to see exactly what happened when and how. And in that case, it acts like an insurance policy.
Good, very good point. Yeah, in fact, talking about security, yeah, if we break down a bit the process, let's assume, first of all, as you said, like, proactive, you can actually detect some things. You as a website owner, like with a plugin like the Productivity Log, or there are services for the access logs, for example, you can set up a certain number of notifications. So when you spot certain patterns, the plugin can send you a notification. Or there are like software solutions even for WordPress, for Apache or Nginx access logs. You can set, or even in firewalls have certain notifications. So if you specify any patterns, yeah, you get alerted. And these are very important because you being proactive. Now, as a website owner, for example, you know that your users, your team, let's put it, because your team that updates your e-commerce store, for example, they always log in between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. from Monday to Friday. Usually they never log in before that or after. So you can set up, for example, notifications. So if there's any user activity before 9 a.m. or 8:30, let's say to be safe, or after 6 p.m. or during the weekend, then the plugin can send you a notification. That like you can set up these type of notifications. Or if usually I don't know, like uh, new users are not allowed to be created, like you are the only person with permission to create new users, then you can set up a notification. So if a new user is created on WordPress, yeah, like to send you the plugin will send you a notification. There are a lot of scenarios. Even like for example, especially if your users have fixed IP addresses, you can set up a notification like if user X logs in from an IP which is not this one, then send me a notification. So it's really, I think what it's important. What do you think, Joel? I think it's very important that as a website admin, you should before setting up these notifications, because you don't want to be kind of like overwhelmed with false positives and stuff and notifications. So it's very important to first understand how your website, how your team is using the website, right? There are like certain patterns usually, right?
Exactly. So, for example, as you very well mentioned, if team usually logs between 8 and 5 or 6, whatever the case may be, then it's fine to set up a notification. If you have login outside of those hours, but if your team is logging in and out like at all times of the day and during the week, then setting up that notification is not going to
Agree.
work. So you need to see what kind of processes you currently have on your website, and then set up notifications uh, for any deviations outside of those processes, basically.
Exactly. So this is the proactive process. So hopefully this will help you, yeah, identify any possible suspicious behavior or actions on your website. But we also have during the process viewer hacked and after, like during and after, a little bit kind of like similar. By the way, especially if your website has been hacked, you have the WordPress activity log, but don't rely just as in like you have a collection of logs, especially you have the access logs, the error logs, and the WordPress logs, and you need to use them together because the access logs basically give you an overview of what happened, like in terms of like who's sending requests directly through to your web server, which could be not specifically actions that are happening directly in WordPress. For example, someone is trying to log in via SSH and modify a theme file, for example. So maybe the operating system was hacked and not your WordPress at first. So, or some accounts were leaked. Someone logged in via SSH and changed the theme file. So in this scenario, for example, the only way to recognize this, you might, for example, there are a few ways. You can have a website file monitor plugin. We have one, in fact, as well, that will alert you of file changes. And by the way, that plugin connects with our activity log, so it will report the file change. So in this case, you need to look at the auth log, for example, on the operating system to see who logged in and stuff at operating system level. You can use the plugins to see what files have changed, for example. Usually when themes or files are changed on WordPress, some malware is injected or stuff like that, usually it's very normal. It's not perfect code. They just want it to run. And it usually generates a lot of errors. So it's also handy to check the PHP error log file, for example, or the web server log file. And you can also check, the plugin as we said to see for. So as we can see, this is not about relying about activity log only, the WordPress activity log or the Apache access logs. You need to, when doing some sort of analysis of what happened, you need to somehow use all the logs available to you and try to trace back to what happened. And only once you trace back what happened, you can identify the issue and also, of course, fix any security problems there were. Is that correct, Joel? Roughly.
Yes, exactly. So you need to verify what has happened by you cross-reference between different logs, and that helps you. So basically, it will help you to get a clear picture of what happened. Because as you said, if there's a breach, it's not necessarily true WordPress itself. Like it might be yes, but it might not. So then you can sort of get a clear picture by looking at all of the systems you mentioned earlier. So depending on the breach, but of course, but like you can look at the operating system, at the web server, at PHP, at file monitor, at the activity log, and that will help you basically understand the process, or rather the journey uh, that the hacker basically went through your breach. Because at every stage you are collecting a log of what's going on.
Exactly, and I think it's very good. Not I think you should do this whenever your website is hacked, because like we've seen it a lot. Many people say, "Oh, my website is hacked. I simply restored backup," which is a good temporary solution. However, there are a few problems with that. Your backup might be hacked. The backup you have of your website might be the hacked version of your website already,
Might be
but also
infected. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But also you need to find out what has happened, because let's say the backup you have that you restored is not a hacked version, but your website will be hacked again because something happened along the way, and the attacker exported some either a vulnerability in a Node plugin or hacked your operating system or whatever. So you need to find out what happened so you can close the security hole, because just by
Exactly.
restoring the backup, you are restoring another the previous vulnerable version of that website. So the attacker will hack it again. It's very normal, by the way. I've seen it a couple of always when someone just restores the backup after a hack. If the backup is clean after a few days, if not hours, the website will be hacked again.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's a lot when it comes to security. Being proactive, as Joel said, especially like setting up notifications and stuff like that. So you are alerted of certain anomalies. For example, a new user account is created, or you're seeing some specific request to a specific page, like random requests. It also helps with accountability. You have a bigger team, e-commerce, membership websites, uh, health agency and stuff like that. We also, yeah, it's very helpful for agencies, as we said. You kind of like don't have to have these uncomfortable discussions and arguments with clients of who did what, and it also helps a lot with technical troubleshooting. And as Joel highlighted very well, even when it comes to troubleshooting, even if you are the only user on the website, logs are very important, because yeah, I look at myself like, if you ask me like what changes did you do on the website last week, I wouldn't know. If there weren't any logs, you wouldn't know. So yeah, those are the benefits, but there's also another benefit, as in like it depends how you look at it. But yeah, compliance and governance, Joel. I mean, is it like it's a benefit because of course, if you are running some sort of e-commerce or almost any type of website nowadays, online system has to comply. It depends on which region you're operating or selling, but has to comply. By the way, it's not just e-commerce, because even especially if you look at the US, not US only, but everywhere. Like if you have some sort of health business or whatever, you need to comply. Uh, your website needs to be compliant with a number of compliance bodies. So yeah, tell us a bit more, maybe, Joel, what compliance is and governance and how all this fits in with yeah, websites and logs.
Yeah, yeah. So as you mentioned, so it's important to reiterate that compliance is dependent on your sector and the market you operate in. So, for example, if you are serving the EU market, then you need to comply with GDPR. It's not an option like you need to because it's the law.
Yeah,
And GDPR requires that you maintain a log of who access protected data and who did. Like, so that's one example. Uh, Similarly, there's a PCI DSS. Um, uh, Again, you need to keep a record of who accessed the customer data and who did not. Very, very strict. There's ISO 27001. Event logging, it requires the production and the retention and review of logs as well. What else? What else?
there are quite a few, right?
Mhm.
Like there's SOC2, SOC2, there's HIPAA. There are quite a few, but as you explained, it's basically depending on which vertical or industry you're operating in. Even if you're not selling, because many people associate usually compliance just with e-commerce, but as we say, for HIPAA, if I'm mistaken, is for the healthcare system. As in, like
Mhm.
when let's assume you have a clinic, maybe you're not selling anything online, but you have a database of patient records and their own personal records. So yeah, there are compliance to ensure that anyone who's operating a website that contains such data has to comply with these regulations to make sure that the customer data, the patient data, is protected. So yeah, like
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
there are a lot. Like the most popular thing that you mentioned, maybe is GDPR. in the EU because yeah, like it requires certain level of transparency and similar stuff uh, for EU customers. But yeah, like basically when it comes to logs, by the way, it's important. Logs don't just tick a compliance box only. You know, like keep it. Let's keep in mind that there's a reason why there are compliance bodies because when you have logs, logs gives you give you evidence. Logs help you troubleshoot and also improve accountability. So even if there is no compliance, I think it's still as a website owner, you should have logs that just even for the upkeeping of your website and accountability of your team, right? I mean, otherwise you'd have
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And even going back to compliance, if something happens, having logs is basically proof that you did what you could to keep the data protected, and
exactly.
that will save you a lot of trouble down the line.
By the way, one important point, maybe which we forgot to mention, it's not about fear mongering, but yeah, like compliance usually. Like if you, the problem with, not problem, but if you don't comply with compliance and something happens, first of all, you have your own business reputation on the line,
Yeah,
and there are fines. And some of the fines from regulation fines are very, very expensive. And that is the last thing you want to deal with. So that's why it's important to have a log, so at least you can prove, as we said, logs give you evidence, so you can show like, listen, yes, we are keeping a log of who is accessing this type of data or this type of patient data and stuff like that. So
yeah,
compliance is very important as well. So yeah, that's roughly about benefits of the logs. There are much more, of course, but roughly that's a good overview of what you can benefit from by having logs. So we have security, accountability, troubleshooting, um, reports and stuff like that. Now,
compliance.
yeah, how to yeah, compliance. Sorry, how to use logs effectively? Like many people, especially who don't have maybe don't have experience with managing logs. Like, what are the best practices, Joe? Let's say I installed WP Active Log plugin on my website. What are the things I should consider when keeping logs, for example?
All right. So first and foremost, the you you'll need to make sure that the server has enough resources to run the plugin. Now, if we talk about double click the log in particular, because that is the one that we can attest to, uh, we test it a lot before every release to make sure that it's as efficient as possible and does not consume too many resources. But at the end of the day, you need some resources because you are recording events and activities.
I
So
think, by the
basically,
way, before we jump, just this applies to every plugin. Whatever, like
yeah, 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 for sure, for sure.
whenever WordPress by default on its own, it consumes a certain number of resources. Whenever you add a plugin, be it SEO, be it whatever, whenever you're adding functionality, whatever it is, of course, you're adding extra functionality. You're adding extra. You need extra resources to maintain this plugin. If you're adding WooCommerce, if you're adding whatever it is, you need to make sure that you have the resources to run that plugin. So if you're adding Active Drop plugin, like everything else, you need to make sure, of course, that your server has the required resources to run that plugin as well.
Exactly, exactly. But the main reason that I'm bringing this up now is that so if your server is lacking resources and you're not in a position to upgrade, then you'll need to limit the scope of what is being logged.
Very good point. Yeah.
So, like in the activity log, you can switch on or off any activity from being logged, basically. So if you don't want to invest or you can't invest, let's say at this point in time, then the first thing that you need to do is figure out what you want to log and not log. Once you've done that, sorry, it's retention. So basically, how long do you want to keep the logs for? Again, this is closely related to server resources. So depending on how much storage space you have on your server, and the and the compliance regulations that you need to comply with.
Yes. In fact, some compliance, especially like in the finance, I think they require you to keep the logs for I think 8 years or 12, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. So you need to see that as well, and that will give you an idea of how long you need to keep the logs for. Once you've determined, and usually that's sort of non-negotiable. So once you've done that, you need to see where you're going to keep them. So of course you can keep them on the same server, on the same database where you have your WordPress database. However, and at least with WP Activity Log, you can save the logs elsewhere. There are a number of different options. So you can save them to an external database. So you create a connection and basically store them anywhere else on a MySQL server. It also the productivity log is compatible with such platforms, log management systems, and SIEMs such as Logly and Papertrail. So you can, and the benefit of that is maybe more geared towards larger institutions where you can basically centralize all of your logs into one place. So as mentioned earlier, the web server has its logs, the operating system has its own logs, PHP has its own logs, and you can sort of centralize all logs in one place. So instead of going back and forth, as we also discussed earlier, when there's an issue and you need to troubleshoot it, maybe there's a breach, you need to go back and forth to follow the trail. If you have a log management system, then everything is in one place and makes it that much easier.
Yeah, I think good point worth mentioning with logs management system, or CM, as you said. CM means security information and events management. So basically, apart from having all the logs from the same server centralized in one place, this applies mostly like to bigger companies where you have, imagine like you have hundreds of websites, hundreds of network devices. You're basically sending all the logs to one central place, and from there it's way easier to track something down and track certain anomalies in the network or incidents that happened on the network. So let's assume you have 100 websites, for example. These are just small numbers for some companies, but yeah, like 100 websites. You can put everything. You can send all the logs to Logly, Papertrail, AWS CloudWatch, or some central syslog server, and that would allow you to get a kind of like a better picture of what is happening on your websites. And this is very, I think there are two reasons. First of all, when you offload logs to a central location, you have, of course, it's more practical. It's easier to access data, but also there are a number of benefits. You are segregating the logs. So if your website is hacked for some reason or whatever, your logs, if they are stored in the WordPress database on the same server, they can be tampered with. So it's very difficult, which is very common. Like when someone hacks a website, especially, like they try to remove the traces so they cannot be tracked back. But if you are sending your logs to a central system, your logs are completely separate, are completely segregated from the website. So regardless of what the attacker does on the website, regardless of what happened on the website, you still have the logs which are not tampered with. So this is also very important from the point of security. That's a very important benefit. So yeah, we have external the retention policies, where to store the logs in an external database or like in a centralized CM or log management system. And you can also, of course, it depends. Like if you're sticking to databases, you can also archive some of the logs with WP Activity Log, for example. So like the main database only has a certain number of logs, so it's easier, especially if you're searching and stuff, to find certain data. And then if you need be, you can of course include the archives. But yeah, quite a few things. So yeah, as maybe we can just to recap a bit, there are a few. What we discussed today, there are a few different types of logs. You have the kind of logs which apply to the developers, are mostly used by developers, which we just covered basically in the beginning, just mentioned them. And then you have a number of logs, user tracking / activity logs, where you have like the WordPress logs, the web server logs, and firewall logs. There are a number of benefits, right, Joel? Incident triage, like when there's a hack, security point of view, preventing security, being proactive, and also analyzing attacks, accountability, and troubleshooting. These are all like very good benefits that agencies, e-commerce websites, membership websites can really benefit from. And there's also logs are required, but also still a benefit because of compliance and governance. Depends on which market you're operating, but yeah, you have 99% of your website has to comply with some sort of compliance and regulations. And here we discuss
Exactly.
also the best practices. Yeah, the retention policies, which are very important, like how long do you want to keep the logs for, what do you want to log, or maybe there are some things which you don't want to log. By the way, in principle, ideally you should log everything,
Everything.
because whenever something happens, you'd be surprised, like there are never enough logs. Never. So
Exactly.
yeah, so idea in principle you should log everything, but yeah, there are retention policies, how long you want to keep the log for. WP Active the log also gives you the option, as Joel explained, like what you want to keep a log of. I don't know, maybe there are some custom fields which change every 2 minutes on your website, and you don't want to keep a log of those, and you can easily exclude them. So it's
Yeah.
not just about resources, but also like maybe you don't want to pollute your
Mm.
activity logs, for example.
Yeah.
Yes, and where to keep your activity logs, very important as well. On the server itself, external database, SIEM/logs management systems. Yeah, and that of course is also a security benefit, because there are two benefits. You are centralizing all the data, so if you have multiple websites, you can get a better picture overview of what is happening on your network of websites, but it also protects the logs from being tampered with.
Yeah. And
Uh,
there's an additional benefit, sorry,
sure, sure.
that if your website goes completely down, you can still access the logs. Because if you're storing the logs on the same server and the website goes down completely, that it's inaccessible, then you can't access the logs either, if the logs are on the same server. If they're
Very,
on external server, you can still access them.
that's a very good point. Very good point. Yeah, yeah. And then of course, yeah, use. I think so. Yeah. To conclude, I think it's important to use your logs. Like if there's something we can highlight from this talk, use your logs effectively. Logs are there for a reason, not just to consume hard disk space, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like review them when you can, set up notifications, like your users, like, and their behavior and what they do on their website and what is the scope of your website. So only you can say, oh, typically users login from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. or only during the weekend, for example, or these people only log in from this region and stuff. So it's only you who can, or like only these users can update the plugin, or only these users can do certain changes. So it's only you who can configure notifications, the notifications that work for you. Of course, especially in the beginning, they might get a bit overwhelming when you have too many notifications, but yeah, it's really up to you. If you want to use logs effectively, set up notifications, schedule reports. Like with WP Active Log, you can actually configure it to send you a weekly, daily, weekly, monthly report of something. You can configure the criteria. So it's good to keep an eye on the logs. They're not just there to wait. If you have logs just to consume space, they're pretty much useless unless something happens. But it's good to keep an eye, yeah, to ensure the uptime of your website and that everything is running smoothly, basically. So there are a lot of benefits when it comes to logs, even just to keep an eye on your website. Is there anything else, Joel, that we should mention? Maybe we forgot to mention about logs and this
No, I
subject.
think we covered it quite well, as in covered the basics quite well.
Good, good. Yeah, thank you for watching. A quick reminder: we do this every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We might later on, maybe we might do a session where we, if we see interest, where we actually use our plugin WP Active Log, maybe to showcase it a bit and show like how people maybe can use it to detect certain patterns or certain behaviors or certain issues. But yeah, I think that should be it. If you have any questions, if you are watching a live session, you can always ask us directly. But if you are watching a recorded version and you have any questions, please send us an email at questions@melapress.com and we'll answer them during the next session.